In the world of finance, few stories are as legendary as the one that took place on September 16, 1992, a day that came to be known as Black Wednesday. On that day, a single man and his hedge fund managed to shake the financial foundations of the United Kingdom, force the government into a humiliating retreat, and pocket more than $1 billion in profit in less than 24 hours. That man was George Soros, and the story of how he broke the Bank of England has become one of the most iconic events in modern economic history. But to understand how it happened, we need to look at the background, the strategy, and the extraordinary set of circumstances that made this possible. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, the United Kingdom was part of a system called the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, or ERM. The purpose of the ERM was to keep European currencies stable, in preparation for a single European currency in the future, what we now know as the euro. Under this system, member countries agreed to keep their exchange rates within a fixed band relative to one another. For Britain, that meant maintaining the value of the pound sterling at a rate tied closely to the German Deutschmark, one of the strongest currencies in Europe at the time. On paper, it was a way to create stability and encourage trade. In practice, it created a massive vulnerability. The problem was that Britain's economy was weak, inflation was high, growth was sluggish, and unemployment was rising. To keep the pound within the ERM's fixed band, the government had to keep interest rates high, even though the domestic economy needed lower rates to stimulate growth. Meanwhile, Germany was raising its own interest rates to deal with inflation following reunification, which put even more pressure on the pound. Economists and traders began to realize that the pound was overvalued, and that the government could not realistically defend its position forever. Among those who recognized this opportunity was George Soros and his team at the Quantum Fund. Soros' strategy was as brilliant as it was bold. He decided to bet against the pound, taking what's called a short position. In simple terms, he borrowed billions of pounds and immediately sold them for other currencies, mainly Deutschmarks. The plan was to buy the pounds back later at a cheaper price, return the loan, and pocket the difference. But to make the strategy work, he needed absolute conviction and enormous scale. Soros and his fund built up short positions worth more than £10 billion, effectively challenging the British government head-on. As September 1992 approached, the pressure on the pound grew unbearable. Investors around the world began to doubt the UK's ability to maintain the currency peg, and speculative attacks intensified. On the morning of September 16th, known forever as Black Wednesday, the battle came to a climax. The Bank of England, under orders from the government, began buying billions of pounds on the open market in an attempt to prop up the currency. At the same time, it announced dramatic interest rate hikes from 10% to 12%, and then to 15% within hours in a desperate attempt to attract buyers and stabilize the pound. But the market was relentless. Traders knew the fundamentals were against the government, and they smelled blood. Every pound that the Bank of England bought was immediately sold back to the market by speculators like Soros. Every interest rate hike made the government look more panicked and less credible. Billions flowed out of the central bank's reserves, but the pound continued to slide. It was a classic case of a government trying to fight market forces and losing. By the end of that fateful day, the British government had no choice but to concede defeat. It announced that the pound would withdraw from the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, effectively admitting that it could not maintain the fixed exchange rate. Almost instantly, the value of the pound collapsed. For most of the country, it was a disaster. Businesses faced uncertainty, the government's credibility was shattered, and the taxpayer absorbed billions in losses from the failed defense. For George Soros and his Quantum Fund, however, it was a triumph. By selling pounds at high prices and buying them back after the collapse, they made more than $1 billion in profit in a single day. The consequences of Black Wednesday were enormous. The British government, led by Prime Minister John Major and Chancellor of the Exchequer Norman Lamont, was humiliated. Confidence in the Conservative Party's economic management collapsed, paving the way for a shift in political power later in the decade. The pound itself remained outside the ERM from that point on, and Britain ultimately chose not to adopt the euro. The day also became a turning point in the perception of financial markets and speculators. It demonstrated that even a powerful central bank could be defeated by global capital flows if its policies were fundamentally unsustainable. As for George Soros, the event cemented his reputation as one of the greatest traders of all time. Newspapers labeled him the man who broke the Bank of England, and although the title was somewhat exaggerated, he literally destroy the bank. It captured the scale of his victory. Soros himself has often explained that it wasn't magic or manipulation, but simply a recognition of economic reality. The pound was overvalued, the government was fighting against fundamentals, and the market eventually corrected itself. He just positioned himself to take advantage of that inevitable correction. Critics have argued that Soros and other speculators profited at the expense of ordinary people. And there is truth in that. The UK Treasury estimated losses of more than £3 billion from its failed defense of the currency, money that ultimately came from taxpayers. But defenders of Soros point out that governments, not speculators, are responsible for maintaining sound economic policies. By trying to artificially hold up the pound, Britain set itself up for failure, and speculators simply accelerated what was going to happen anyway. In the years that followed, the lessons of Black Wednesday were studied by policymakers and economists worldwide. It became a cautionary tale about the dangers of fixed exchange rates and the risks of ignoring market fundamentals. Many governments realized that trying to peg their currencies without the economic strength to back it up was a losing battle. For Soros, the profits from that day became part of a much larger fortune, and the legend of his billion-dollar bet entered financial folklore. Even decades later, the story of George Soros and the Bank of England remains one of the most dramatic demonstrations of the power of financial markets. It shows how one person with vision, conviction, and immense resources can stand against an entire government and win. It highlights the delicate balance between politics, economics, and speculation, and how quickly the tide can turn when confidence breaks. Most of all, it serves as a reminder that in the world of money, reality cannot be ignored forever. A currency that is overvalued will eventually fall, no matter how hard a government tries to defend it. And those who understand this truth can make fortunes in the process. On September 16, 1992, George Soros made more than $1 billion in one day, not by luck, but by understanding economic fundamentals more clearly than the policymakers of a major nation. That is why his name remains etched in history as the man who broke the Bank of England.